I want to welcome our witnesses, say how much I appreciate your thoughtful testimony. I've read it all. There's some pretty compelling stories. This is, from my standpoint, a very important hearing. As I've looked back at the laws written, designed to protect people that have the courage to come forward within government, to blow the whistle, to tell the truth, to highlight problems of waste and abuse and corruption and potential criminal activity within departments and agencies. We have a number of laws, and they date back quite a few years. And with Mr. Devine's testimony, I added a new one. Didn't realize it went back as far as 1912 with the Lloyd LaFollette Act, followed by the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, then the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989, and then the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act of 2012. And yet we still have problems. My own experience with this, having come to government pretty late in life, started really with the events with Secret Service in Cartagena. And then as we started looking at the reports being issued and written by the Office of Inspector General, the fact that there was retaliation, or certainly evidence of retaliation against members of that inspection team for being forthright. And then followed up just recently with our border security hearings. We had a Customs and Border Protection agent, Chris Cabrera, testify before this committee, contradicting some of the information from the Department of Homeland Security, but also testifying under oath, as all of you will be doing here today. And a few weeks later, a couple months later, he testified on March 17th, 2015. A few months later, right before another hearing on May 13th, 2015, this committee was made aware that Agent Cabrera was being scheduled for a hearing in front of the Internal Affairs. Now, I raised the issue with then still Deputy Chief of U.S. Border Patrol, Ron Vitello, and I stated, because of my Lutheran background, I'll put the best construction on things, and I was assuming that hearing with Internal Affairs was all about being concerned about what he was bringing to the table and wanting to correct any errors within the Customs and Border Protection Agency. I'm not so sure that was the case. Fortunately, because we highlighted in our hearing that that Internal Affairs hearing with Mr. Cabrera was canceled that same day rather abruptly. So I've a certain sense that maybe that wasn't so innocent. They really had something else in mind with that hearing. So these issues are very serious. As a result, my office has set up a website, whistleblower at ronjohnson.senate.gov. We've already had over 130 whistleblowers throughout the government contact our office, and what we have here today are 4 of the individuals that did contact our office. And I'm also mindful through Mr. Devine's testimony that probably the greatest risk any whistleblower incurs is when they contact Congress. It sounds like that is where the greatest retaliation can occur. So again, I want to thank all the witnesses for coming here. The purpose of this hearing is not to adjudicate the issues you have raised. I mean, that will occur through a process, a procedure. The purpose of this hearing is to highlight, so the American people understand, so that this committee understands, that once an individual steps forward and puts their career at risk, expose themselves to the type of retaliation that is unfortunately all too common, we want to hear what type of retaliation is inflicted on individuals and what form of retaliation or what forms retaliation takes. So that's really the purpose of this hearing. I do want to caution people there may be some areas where some testimony might come close to revealing classified information or law enforcement sensitive. I want to make sure we don't breach those restrictions. But with that, again, I want to welcome all of our witnesses, appreciate your courage, appreciate the courage of anybody willing to step forward and risk that kind of retaliation. And I'm looking forward to hearing your testimony and your answers to our questions. With that, Senator Carper. Let me start by saying, as I was reading the testimony, as I'm listening to it, coming from the private sector, where when you're at the top of a company, it's always kind of hard to get the information not filtered so that you really get the truth. I mean, as I'm hearing what was brought to the attention of superiors, I'm thinking you ought to be having medals pinned to your chest not have retaliation inflicted upon you. So what I'd like to ask the whistleblowers here, I want you to very, hopefully as easily as possible, describe to me why. Why were you retaliated against? And I'd like to start with Lieutenant Colonel Amerine. And I appreciate you meeting with me in my office yesterday. I just want to, because you told me an awful lot yesterday, which I appreciate. I think I maybe have your why, but I want you to confirm this. You told me that in the course of your attempts to gain the freedom of these hostages in Afghanistan and Pakistan, you were made aware, it's your belief, that the government did pay a ransom and that ransom money was stolen. And secondly, that you believed you were pretty close to potentially having a deal where we would get 7 hostages in exchange for 1 Taliban leader. And instead we got 1 hostage in exchange for 5 Taliban leaders. Is that kind of in a nutshell, that information, is that why you've been retaliated against, or what is the reason?
Yes, sir. I think that there are layers of this, as I said, in terms of layers of the bureaucracy. On December 1st of 2014, Representative Hunter submitted a complaint to the IG alleging an illegal or questionable ransom possibly being paid for Sergeant Bergdahl. There was a good deal of evidence that it occurred and a lot of questions as to how it occurred. That complaint implicated both the DoD organization and the FBI. So part of what lit the fuse was the same folks in the FBI that were basically implicated in the DoD IG complaint of 1 December were the ones that later complained to the Army that I was sharing sensitive information with Representative Hunter. Another aspect of it on the FBI side was, I think, just the general frustration with Representative Hunter pushing them hard on civilian hostages and their awareness that I was speaking to Representative Hunter about all of this. I mean, he even set up a meeting between my office and the FBI to try to help them out with some of this. And after the meeting, they responded by contacting Caitlin Coleman's father and threatening him not to speak to Representative Hunter again or he would stop getting supported by the FBI. I mean, just an atrocious treatment of family. So the FBI complained to the Army, and for reasons to be seen, there was a bit of a debate within the Army whether I actually did anything wrong. And my understanding is one party, who I just don't want to be speculative, but there was a big debate within the Army over whether I did anything wrong, and that led to the investigation.
Can you tell me a little bit about what deal you thought you had for the release of the hostages?
So my office worked options. We looked at a whole variety of options. One of the options that we developed was a we called it, the 1-for-7 option. It entailed 6 hostages and a 7th person I'd just rather not discuss today. So the 6 hostages is actually 5 hostages and a prisoner of war. So Sergeant Bergdahl, Caitlin Coleman, the child she bore in captivity, Josh Boyle, and Colin Rutherford. When we saw that nobody else was trying to get them home, we were working every initiative possible. One was the 1-for-7, and in that we were looking at Haji Bashir Noorzai. He was described as the Pablo Escobar of Afghanistan, and we realized that he actually is just another warlord who was actually an ally of the Karzai regime. We lured him to the U.S. under a false promise of safe passage and basically unsealed an indictment and put him in jail for life. Some felt he was a wretched human being and others felt he was wronged. As we looked at the options, we looked at 5-for-1, which we thought had died in 2012, as the worst option. And so for us it was, we aren't getting Bergdahl, let alone the other hostages, back for free. Every option was going to be painful. So the Noorzai option for us was one that was at least less painful. So we were able to reach out to the Norzai tribe itself that we believe could free the hostages, and we made a lot of progress on it. I briefed it widely, but in the end, when the Taliban came to the table, the State Department basically said it must be the 5-for-1. That's the only viable option we have, and that's what we went with.
I can see how members of the government, if there was an option for 7 or 6 Americans for 1 Taliban, and the deal ended up being 5 Taliban for 1 American, they probably wouldn't want that too highly publicized. So, okay, that makes sense to me. Ms. Taylor, can you, again, try and encapsulate it pretty concisely in terms of why? Who was threatened? What was threatened?
I think with regards to who was involved in the investigation, I'm going to do that every time. Sorry, guys. I think that because of the people that were involved with the investigation, it maybe put a different light, and there was a lot of extra outside influences and kind of back and forth with the different members and different agencies. So we're all kind of, as police officers, the last thing you want to be is listed as a whistleblower. And you usually ride the wave and keep your head down and your mouth shut. And I actually did that in this case until I was contacted by the Inspector General's office. And we are required to cooperate with them, and I did. And I think breaking that silence kind of, I mean, I had everything in a 12-year career thrown at me, and a lot of stuff that was not factual. So I think there was a lot of issues surrounding that as far as the retaliation.
Briefly, because I don't want to lose this thread. You said, as an investigator, the last thing you want to be known as is a whistleblower. Is that because it's well known, the retribution, the retaliation?
Well, there's a brotherhood. You don't want to see your colleagues hurt. And in this case, I don't see a lot of corruption or a lot of problems at the agent level. What I have seen is some significant problems at a leadership level. And that's not to get anybody in trouble. I think one family in DHS being hurt is enough. I just think there needs to be some corrective action. And I lost my train of thought. Did that answer your question?
No, it does. In your testimony, again, I was looking at these laws ahead of time, and for me, it started back in 1978, and I guess it is with the Civil Service Act. But in your testimony, you enlightened me that, no, it really started with the Lloyd-LaFollette Act in 1912. And you said it was an anti-retaliation law that created a no-exceptions right to communicate with Congress.
Yes,
This
sir.
is really the point we're talking about here with Lieutenant Colonel Amerine. He has an absolute no-exception right to communicate with Congress. What's gone haywire? And in particular, the question I asked earlier is, I keep asking myself why. Again, coming from the private sector, I'm always, especially at the top of the organization, I'm always looking for individuals to let me know what's pulling off so I can actually address problems. So again, we should be pinning medals on these people's chest as opposed to retaliating them. So tell me a little bit about that Lloyd-LaFollette law. But also, is there some very common, very universal answer to the question, why?
The Lloyd-LaFollette Act is an excellent principle, but it's hampered because there is no procedure to enforce it, and there is no remedies even if you found a violation somehow. So it's just basically a symbolic law, and it's been waiting a long time to get some teeth in it. As far as the more fundamental question, I've asked myself that for a long time, Senator, and I think my own insights are that the federal agencies and some private organizations too behave this way almost as the institutional equivalent of an animal instinct. An animal's instinct is to destroy anything that threatens it. And organizations behave the same way. In fact, I do. When somebody slugs me, I don't think, maybe there's a lesson to be learned from that, and we should talk this through. What's the cause of it? I want to flatten that person who attacked me because I'm angry, they hurt me, and because I don't want to give them a chance to do it again. And this is the way institutions react to whistleblowers. snuff out the threat. And it's unfortunate. It's very short-sighted. Whistleblowers are like the bitter pill that keeps you out of the hospital. It's bad news in the short term, but it can be important for your survival. We've got a whole cliche on it: don't kill the messenger. And
again, that's awful general. As I listen to the four witnesses here, in my mind, I can at least assume some specific whys. Somebody being protected, some piece of information that we didn't want to have disclosed, like for Lieutenant Colonel Amerine, the fact that there really was potentially a deal of 7 Americans for 1 Taliban, that there might have been a ransom paid that was stolen. I'm going to get back to the other witnesses to find out their specific why, but I mean, isn't it, again, I'm looking for your knowledge because you've been dealing with this a long time. Is it protecting an individual or people in power?
Part of it is the structure of the communications. When a whistleblower works up through the organizational chain of command, sooner or later you reach someone who's maybe is responsible for the wrongdoing, and a conflict of interest kicks in by someone who has power over the messenger. And that's why it's so important that when there is that conflict, when it's not just a mistake that everybody wants to fix, but somebody is engaged in wrongdoing, that they have access to safe, clear access to Congress to circumvent the conflict of interest and get some independent response to their concerns.
Look at that. That's why we set up our whistleblower at ronjohnson.senate.gov. Just throw that plug out there. And of course, I'm assuming the 4 individuals here will have some measure of protection by coming public and showing courage. Mr. Keegan, I'd like to get, kind of pick up with you specifically. Again, can you point to a why? And then I'm going to ask the other whistleblowers, what does it cost you? I understand in terms of this kind of retaliation, there's reputational harm. That's a cost. It's a grave cost. Having a hostile work environment in all kinds of ways, sitting on a folding chair, not having a desk, all those types of things. But I want the dollar cost. I really want you to let us know, how has this cost you financially? But first, Mr. Keegan, I want to give you the opportunity of why in your case.
Why I think it was done?
Yeah. I mean, was somebody trying to protect themselves? I mean, was it just this general overall, we want to protect the Social Security Administration?
Well, I believe, Senator, having sat in a number of high-level meetings of Social Security in the months prior to this debacle that happened to me, Acting Commissioner Colvin was in the beginning stages of believing she was going to be nominated and then finally being nominated. In at least 3 meetings, the Chief of Staff, James Kisko, was Ms. Colvin's number 2 person, made the statement that nothing is going to leave this agency that is going to embarrass Carolyn Colvin. I can't make a direct connection between that and what happened to me, but it certainly seems to make some sense to me. In answer to your question of what it cost me, I had a 44-year career military, 12 years in the private sector, and 12 years of senior executive service. I had nothing but outstanding performance ratings, awards, and promotions until my very last performance review at the Social Security Administration, which capped off my 44 years and basically destroyed everything that I had worked for in my career. It cost me, practically cost me my marriage, to be perfectly frank, because 1 year of sitting in an office, staring at 4 walls and watching the clock tick, being a very high-energy, results-oriented person, for me, was a death by 1,000 cuts. What it cost me financially, I finally just could not take it anymore, and I retired. I retired 5 years early. I was not financially prepared to retire, and I have not been able to get a job consistent with my background and my experience for 2 reasons. One, I can't get a reference, and number 2, how do I explain on a resume how I went from a senior member of the Senior Executive Service to a non-supervisory advisor with no responsibility, no accountability, and no duties? So I think the cost, and I think my wife would tell you, Senator, the cost has been inordinate and enormous.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ducos-Bello.
Thank you. For me, the biggest cost has been watching my son trying to jump out of his high school roof because he saw his father lost his uniform, his weapon. He's always been very proud of my career. and the way I perform my duties, not only at work, but off duty. I have raised 3 excellent children, but it was the most costing and emotionally devastating thing that I had to do. Receive that phone call that no father wants to receive, that your son is in the roof of his high school getting ready to jump because his father is going through a whistleblower retaliation action. Luckily, I was there. I got in time. The police was there, and the fire department was there with the jumping blanket. He finally jumped, and he was held by Montgomery County Police, and he wouldn't let nobody arrest him. He has to be arrested by his father. And with great pain, I picked my son, who is autistic, to come down to the office, put the handcuffs on him, and took him to the patrol. And then I followed on my vehicle and spent 2 days in the hospital talking to him that my problem was going to be resolved eventually, that patient will pay off. Financially, it has cost me over $41,000 in lawyer's fees just to keep my job. I'm in debt up to my neck, but as a responsible citizen, I pay all of them and waiting, hopefully, that one day I can be compensated for all the troubles that financially I have put myself into because I did the right thing. This is very hard for me. I mean, I'm reliving something that no father wants to relive, but it has put a strain, like Mr. Keegan said, put a big strain on my 26-year marriage. But luckily for me, I have a very supporting wife that I can talk to. I used the employee assistance program. I went to therapy and talked to a counselor. And she told me, you know, you haven't done anything wrong. You should be proud of yourself. And why did we created this new enhancement whistleblower protecting act in 2012 if we are not going to clear the air and punish the guilty and protect the whistleblower?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Johnson.
Oh, yes, sir. I think a few things that folks said, just kind of about protecting people in power. The lieutenant here, is it Colonel or Lieutenant? I'm not Lieutenant Colonel, I'm sorry. Just having a little bit of common sense and starting a conversation could, you know, there wasn't that communication there. But I think ultimately, as far as reasons, it is protecting people. It's maybe our leadership not having the courage to kind of stand up and say, okay, these are our people. We need to take care of them. It's supposed to be a family. And that's not all their fault. There's been a lot of upheaval with the merger, and, you know, we're all dealing with a number of things.
Okay. Again, I was looking for the cost. I mean, what's
Oh, I thought you said the cause. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, cost.
I apologize. You know, there's always that financial cost with legal fees. You know, I had a great job, so I adopted my 2 little girls. So I have 2 older ones from my first, so I have 4 kids, and I'm in the middle of an adoption. My salary was affected. I didn't get a step increase. So not only did I add 2 kids to my household, but I didn't get my increase. They finally did fix that. But, you know, the phone calls, there's a huge expense just to being an active member of your family. I mean, the joy is kind of like sucked out of your life. I'm pretty fun, and, you know, I like to work hard and go home and play hard. And you lose a little bit of that because it really just sucks it out of you.
Okay, thank you. Lieutenant Colonel.
I mean, for me, I had to burn 2 months of leave that I had intended to use for retirement leave. So that was about $18,000 because initially when my security clearance was suspended, they moved me out of a top secret facility to put me in a secret open storage facility. where my presence in and of itself would have represented a security violation while I'm under investigation for a security violation. So, I mean, I took 2 months leave just to get out of there and to not potentially further incriminate myself. And then thanks to my JAG, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Ruling, I was able to finally get assigned to a position where I wouldn't be, committing a security violation by going to work. There's some legal fees. We'll see how far that goes. But I mean, the broader cost to me is what it shows the younger soldiers and officers in the Army. I mean, we always have difficulty with our junior officers and our junior non-commissioned officers showing them that, remaining in the military, working your way up the ranks is something you ought to aspire to do. And I mean, here are all these officers that I knew as cadets that are seeing what's happening to me, and the example set for them is terrible. And what does it do to the Army? The Army is killing itself with things like this. When you go after people who are reporting significant issues and crimes, when you go after people who are whistleblowing, although I still loathe the term, you end up setting a terrible example for all the other people that are seeing the retaliation. So that's the cost to me that matters, is what it's doing to my Army.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. I think that really is, in the end, the final answer of why. Whether it's organization or whether it's protecting somebody else, it's really trying to make an example of somebody so the next person doesn't step forward. Isn't that kind of the bottom line? Senator Carper. I'd also like to thank all of our witnesses for your thoughtful testimony, your thoughtful answers to our questions, your courage for coming forward. I want to thank every whistleblower that has the courage to come forward to tell the truth. I agree with the goal of the Lloyd-LaFollette Act, an anti-retaliation law that was created, that created a no exceptions right to communicate with Congress, which is why we have set up our website, whistleblower at ronjohnson.senate.gov. So again, I want to encourage other individuals with courage to come forward. It's the only way we're going to reform government, reform bureaucracy, is if people know about it, if the public has the light of day shown upon abuse and corruption. So again, thank you all for your testimony, for coming forward. The hearing record will remain open for 15 days until June 26th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.